everybody, welcome to Fight Chat Friday. So today we have a special episode, and as you can see, we have a special guest with us here as well, Mr. Jamie Williams, the black belter himself. So thanks to Jamie for getting involved. So a bit of a background story is we're doing a little bit of a project at the moment, so recording some videos and things this morning, and of course I went over on my ankle, had a little bit of an injury, so we drafted in the black belter there to give us some demonstrations, hopefully, to help us out with today's
Richie was really selling his McGregor impression, let's be fair.
Yeah, exactly. Good timing after the weekend. So get your questions in. If you have any questions, we have some lined up already from people that sent them in already. So feel free to drop them into the chat box here. We'll chat through them, and if there's any things that we can talk about and discuss, absolutely we will. So we'll get straight into it, get started with the first one. So the first one comes from our Instagram story feature. So this is from Tila Melly, who asks, what is a good ratio, high versus low intensity, for competition sparring training? Numbers again. So Adrian, do you want to give us a start on that one?
Yeah, so, and again, really appreciate the question, and it's something that we have definitely heard in some format or another before, and I suppose the real answer to that depends on what phase of your training you're in. So our overall training intensity might be that little bit lower in the initial pre-season and early season, while we're trying to build a little bit of an aerobic base and get ourselves set in order to be able to recover well after our high intensity training. The closer we get to our peak competition, or the competition that we want to be at our peak for, the more the training should be representative of the competition environment. So what we would say is that you're going to be looking to spar hopefully 4 to 5 times in order to get yourself through a final. Every match is going to be 2 by 2 minutes with a little bit in reserve there for additional time and first point. You're likely to face at least one. And then within each match, we're talking about alternating bouts of higher and lower intensity. So the type of training that we want to look at is something that reflects that. And the most representative thing that we can do, of course, is spar at the full intensity against appropriate opponents. And that should be something that is at least a part of your training coming up towards the competition itself. If you can't have access, really just considering the fitness part of it, you just want to make sure that your scenarios, your pad drill or bag work, represent as close as possible the type of fatigue that you're going to experience in your Taekwondo match. So in other words, we do want to be kicking and punching. We do want to have explosive bouts that are followed by less explosive, more steady state kind of recovery periods. And we would like the work recovery to be something from, we say 1 period of work to 3 periods of rest, all the way down to alternating as much as you can, down to 1 period of work to equal period of rest. And you'll find that horrific by the time we get to the end of it.
We were only speaking about this as well today when we were just having a chat about maybe the UFC fight at the weekend. We mentioned about the whole idea of being representative in terms of the muscle fatigue that you need as well, and we're having a chat about using cardio on the bike and things like that, and then we're talking about the whole idea of the mental focus that's required with that intensity that comes with sparring at a competition level as well. So there are other factors as well that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, and I suppose we finished that conversation with Jamie. You were talking about the assault bike being kind of the closest thing to what your body feels like after a really tough spar when you're already fatigued. So if it's a tool that you have access to, great, do play with it. Intervals on the assault bike are a great way without any impact on the body or any mental stress other than the pain of it, to really build up the energy systems. That and Tabata intervals on pads, bag, great way to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next question from Ira Scherzinger: what exercises would you recommend to jump higher?
Okay, so we'll maybe give a few demonstrations, but we kind of have to start with some perspective in this. Like in Taekwondo, we want to jump higher for 2 reasons. Usually, it's not for sparring, it's for special technique, or it's for fundamental movements and patterns. So we have a few specific jumps in the patterns, and we can talk about those. And outside of the pattern, we have a special technique. And really our basics are, we have to start with the basics of having good joint stability, good strength through the joints, and then plyometrics. So jumping, bounding, rebounding exercises. So it could be as simple as box jumps. It could start as simple as skipping until, the ankles are built up and you're working through your skipping. We can add double unders, so where your skips are going to be higher and you're going to be circling the rope twice. I can do that. The rope's not there. We can do that. But box jumps, rebounds off the box, step, all those kind of things are great exercises. Let's maybe just have a look at some of the ones that occur in the patterns for now, because those come up for almost everybody, and have a look at just maybe one or two little tips that will help with them. The first one is don't reset the feet. So let's take Chung Mu as an example, and we have, coming from our U-shaped block into the knife hand guarding block, we don't want to reset the feet when we jump. We want to remember it's simply down, up and down, almost like your sine wave. And I'm going to drop into my stance and bring my hands over my shoulder, and raising those hands and bring them in the direction of the spin is going to help me finish it. And it can be, quite easy once you hold your body upright and you use your hands to help with the jump. We also have, for example, in Juche, turning into a mid-air knife hand strike. And with the mid-air strike, we have to finish in the air before we land. So again, very much the same principles coming from your knife hand guarding block. We have our down and up, and then we're going to land. And what we're looking for with those is, again, the exact same principles. An upright trunk helps us to preserve the axis of rotation, and bringing the hands up with us in time with the jump really helps us add to the explosive power. Those arms really do contribute to the jump.
Definitely, yeah. Some good ones there. So next we will look at this one coming in from Ibrahim, who asks, how long does it take to get a black belt first dan Taekwondo? So this one, it depends. So it depends on where you're training, who you're training with. But generally we would be looking at maybe 6 to 10 years even for some people. And that's mostly the case, isn't it, Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, it also depends how young you are. So, for example, in Ireland here, with the ITA, we have a minimum age of 13 years. So, if you start at 4, it's going to be, 9 years for you. But if you were starting at 8 years, 8 years of age, you might do it in 5. But we very rarely have anyone going less than 4.5, 5 years.
Yeah. So we'll have a look at this one from. Okay, I can't pronounce this name, but let's go with the question, okay? How to approach training when you're the best in the gym. So this is one that is a common occurrence, because often people who kind of last the longest are usually going to be the best, obviously. And there's multiple ways you can train in other places, of course. You can cross-train and get new sparring partners and work with other people locally. But I know, Adrian, you have some ideas on constraining, something that we always talk about in sparring as well. And we have Jamie here with us as well, who is probably the top guy, world champion in your gym. So that might be some good examples to take from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose the first thing to say is, without offending anyone else in the club, it's probably fair to say that Jamie has the...
I was trying to be nice, but okay.
Yeah, Jamie's the top dog in the club. But it's really important to realise as well that, Jamie, like anyone else, has started at 7 years of age, and definitely wasn't the top dog in the club all the way through until he was. And, that requires overtaking people. It requires people, retiring or leaving the club and moving away. But we've had the same problem forever. There's always a top dog in the club. There's always someone up there. And so our challenge is, if we just spar, well, Jamie will beat everybody that he just spars, if that's the scenario. 4 times out of 5, whatever it happens to be. So we have to create scenarios and constraints where he's at least challenged, where someone might be working on a different thing in the constraint to what he is. So, if we have an example where one person is allowed everything under the sun, except one shot, well, Jamie might be trying to do the same thing but only score off left, or he might be restricting himself to only hands, or he might be starting from closer to the edge of the ring. There's an awful lot that we can do to make the match just a little bit harder. Of course, spending most of the training time with the 3 or 4 people who are closest in ability is a huge help. But for us, I suppose squad training is the biggest thing. So it's can we get all of the tactical prep and the physical prep done here, and then really let him try to test everything at game speed, when we meet with the rest of the national team, and we get to interact with more people who are at a similar level.
So there's definitely many ways to go about that, yeah. So you don't want to just be plodding through and doing the same thing as always, because you want your practice always to be deliberate, and there's many ways you can approach that. So, question from Aveen here: do you have any tips on managing weight to make a certain weight category? So, first off, I would say be careful of where you're starting from, and don't be trying to come down to a category that's too drastic, basically. So you want to be thereabouts of your walking around weight, because there's a couple of reasons. You want to be not depleting yourself before you go to competition. You want your training leading up to the last couple of weeks to be quite solid, and so you want to be close and thereabouts already. Again, Jamie is a great guy here. He's making 57 kilos for a long time and very experienced, so I'm sure Adrian and Jamie will have some tips here as well on this.
Do you want to add anything on that one?
Yeah, I think you kind of want to get your training to be too focused around making weight. I think like you want your the weight to come off. Your training just to be your normal training, and then the weight coming off to be like a second factor, to something secondary. Whereas if you're going into every training session and all you're actually focusing about is burning calories, and I have to get a sweat, and you're trying to wrap yourself up in your sweatsuit and that, or bin bags and all, and that's every training session, that's all you're focused about. Right, what did I lose in this session? They're not the most productive sessions. I think if you're going in trying to improve your sparring skills or your patterns or whatever, well, it's going to be sparring, not patterns for making weight, but improve your sparring and improve your skills and getting yourself sharp, and then just the weight comes off as secondary. I think that's the best way. And then as you taper and you get towards closer to the championships and the last week or so, then you can really just focus on making weight, where most of all the training is actually done and you're sharp and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the key thing is you don't do it alone. So you always want to make sure that you are working to a plan, and that you have advice and support when you are, especially the first couple of times that you're trying to make a weight cut, that before you even start trying to make the weight cut, that it's actually something that's viable and it's physically possible. Aveen's young, so you'd want the support of your parents, because you're probably not cooking and buying all of your own food at this stage. So you want to make sure you have a meal plan that's sustainable as well, because we do want to make sure that your eating supports your training, and that your competition weight is a weight that is, and particularly for juniors and particularly for females, is something that is sustainable, within a couple of kilograms of that weight the majority of the time. Everybody is going to enjoy a summer holiday or a Christmas holiday, and the weight will go up a little bit, and that's great. But, your training weight shouldn't be a million miles away from your competition weight.
Okay, so we have a question here in the comments from David Crock. So David is asking, what is more beneficial for sparring, sprints or long distance? So I'm assuming here he's referring to cardio base and things like that. So we've got both types of cardio that we need for sparring. We need a mixture of aerobic and anaerobic. So essentially we need to have a base in both, but of course sparring is going to be like explode, then bring down the intensity, explode. So it's similar to sprints. But Adrian, what are your thoughts on that in terms of a way to prepare for your cardio for sparring specifically?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because while for the specific energy demands of the event itself, you might say sprints are a little closer. That's not true. We do repeats. So, for most people who are looking for a running-based solution to tackling our fitness, something like fartlek training is often what's done, which would be mixing up and downhill, short sprints, longer fast runs, and longer periods of kind of more, I suppose, steady state aerobic running. But my cautionary tale on all that one is don't get so good at running that you're not good at Taekwondo.
Yeah,
I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, but maybe this is a good opportunity here to maybe give you an example of one or two repeats that you could do, and how you could structure it, Adrian, for specifically developing your cardio base for ITF sparring.
Yeah, I suppose we can. We'll grab some gloves, I suppose, is the easiest way to do that. I have some here.
While the lads are getting ready here, we can go through a couple of other questions. So Gavin, who is tuned in from the sunny southeast here in Ireland, 23 degrees today, it's not often that we get it. So he's asking our opinion on the difference between a coach and an instructor. And there can obviously be a crossover, and some be better at one. So it's a very, very good question. So in Taekwondo, we have both the sports side and the martial arts side. And usually there's a differentiation. The instructor is seen as the martial art, and then usually the coach is seen more on the other side of things. So Adrian has done a lot of work on this actually on the ITF Coaches Committee, and we did do a post on this. If you search our website or blog post, there is a blog post on this. And just to sum up our ideas very briefly, we think that they need to go hand in hand, and they're almost terms that need to be used in conjunction with each other, and like one essentially means the other thing. In terms of an instructor, the traditional way would be an instructor goes to the top of the class and gives direction and gives instruction, and you just follow that. But a coach has so much more involved. You got to help people a lot more, and you got to be a bit more hands-on. And I think in this day and age, it's not really fair to call anybody an instructor. I think that everybody really is a coach, although they may not use that term.
Yeah, I think that one is, it's the martial arts interpretation of instructor, and even the word itself varies across countries. So, you know, if you go to Poland, maybe it's trainer. If you go to another place, maybe it's coach. If you go to another place, maybe it's teacher. If you go to another place, you know, the connotations of the word vary. And I think in English-speaking countries, we see a Taekwondo instructor, a martial arts instructor, as someone who's more significant than just a sports coach. Whereas within the language that's often used in the sports community, the coach is the one who does all of the things that we think of an instructor for, whereas the instructor is the person who, if you imagine in your mind a Zumba class instructor or a Pilates instructor, they're there for you to make sure that you get through your activity safely, that you're well supported, but they're not there for you. Is over and the key is locked, the door, they're gone, and they've no vision towards your future development. That's not really their concern. So they're there for you in and of the moment, and then they're gone. So really, it's terminology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we get the guys here to give us some examples of ways that you can specifically train to develop your cardio base for sparring.
Okay, so if you want to we'll just take 6 repetitions rather than going to a time. So just to go slow, we're going to have cross a hook and here, and we're going to be rotating this way. And what we'll do is we'll bring this up then to what we'd normally have in full speed. And relax.
And you can see, obviously, both Adrian and Jamie have done this before, and I think that's a very important thing to note, because you shouldn't be doing this with things that are brand new and things that you're just learning. So these should be done with techniques that you're quite comfortable with, and that you're comfortable with doing them in an explosive fashion and repeating them over and over again. So ideally, you shouldn't be learning new techniques with this type of training. It should be something you're quite comfortable with doing already.
So just show one more to introduce a little bit of variety. So here, take Nerio, backhand, front leg. Here, Nerio, backhand, front leg. And again, we'll take 6 to 8. Normally, we'd be deciding a time domain for this. So it might be 10 seconds of work, 20 seconds of rest. That would be a nice one. Or it could be something like 8 seconds of work, 12 seconds of rest if we were being a little nastier. Here we go.
See how these really represent the training, the event we're looking to perform in. So it's very, very similar to sparring itself. And if you can do this and progressively overload and progressively challenge yourself, you can see the benefits of this are really going to help your performance in sparring, especially in competition and sport side of things.
What we can do, Tila's question earlier, is we can make this very relevant to our match. You know, we'll be doing 2 2-minute rounds. So if we say, for example, 8 seconds of work, 12 seconds of rest, that's 20 seconds. To repeat that 6 times, we have a round. We take a minute break, that again, we have a match. So it lets us do things that are kind of representative. And in between our bouts, we might just be moving, changing direction, and throwing light shots, in order to continue to make it as representative as possible.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So since we have the gear on, we'll tackle Jake's question here. He asks, How do you see guys falling over after throwing a technique in sparring, but it seems they still get the point? So maybe we can demonstrate some of the ways that the rule book says it is a score and it isn't a score, and maybe some of the blurred lines that we often see.
Okay, so we'll start with a couple of easy ones. So, for example, we have this band-aid. So I'm going to be scoring over Jamie's shoulder here as he steps in, but I lose my balance. So if it looks, for example, he's coming in here and I fall or I exit the ring, as long as my foot came to the ground and I had a moment where, boom, I got my foot back to the ground before I fell, that's going to count as a score. I have regained balance. As opposed to, and if we just have there, boom, and a direct fall to the floor. That's actually much harder to do without crushing the microphone than you think. So if you have a direct fall to the floor, of course, there's no score. The second problem we might have is traveling. So cover for back kick. Yep. So if I'm in this position and we have the back kick here, my foot has crossed the line here. I left the ring and foot was on the ground before the back kick landed. So once again, we have one and then a hit. Tough one for the referees to call. If my foot landed outside here, I was not in the ring at the time the point was scored. If we do the same thing, we just go in a natural flow here, and I landed, and then my feet land outside the ring, well, I initiated the movement inside the ring, I got my score, and then I landed. That is a score. So again, there's a small difference between the point of contact before or after that is going to determine whether or not we have a score. And it does sometimes get a bit complicated with headshots, where, you know, if we just cover here, for example, I might have defended and scramble, or my hand comes to the ground after, we say, the headshot here, something like this happens. It depends on the order of events. As long as I get a foot to the ground first, before the hand touches or before I fall over, I'll get the score because I have recovered. Might not look balanced, but I have recovered.
Yeah, and often you see as well, people use these as an exit shot to get out of the ring towards the dying ends of a match. So you might see somebody will
take this.
Maybe 10 seconds to go, they're ahead on the scoreboard, and they use some tactics like this to exit the ring safely and still delay the time a little bit without being seen as unsportsmanlike. So some tricks of the trade there as well. Yeah,
I mean, we saw that from Alameen against Danilo pretty recently, and Jamie had that in the quarterfinal in the World Championships against Tito. So, but you can take it on that, on the band-aid, etc., when you're on the edge of the ring, or when the scores are in your favour and the warnings are unsettled. Why not take the shot at the score? Because the worst thing that happens is you don't get your score, you can see the warning, okay, but you're still in a good position in the match. Whereas, like with this one, if he does score this shot, boom, boom, he's potentially picking up 4 points and the match is dead, it's over. So we'll have that. Yep,
and final question, if you have any in the live show here, just drop them into the comment box and we'll tackle those. But the last one that we have sent in, what is the best type of weight training for TKD?
Okay, I think that really does depend on where you're at in your training. What we will usually recommend, and Jamie's sister Jess has kind of only recently started, I suppose, onto the weight training. Normally we'd start in late teens for the girls, maybe a little bit earlier for the guys. So we will usually start the guys earlier if we are controlling that, if they're interested, if they're competitive. And our initial focus is on getting them loading, well, initially making sure that they're moving through the main types of movement well, and then loading that for consistency. So we want that technique consistency first, then we can add some weight and some intensity, we can add some load. We're really kind of puzzled around, we don't know how strong is strong enough. Like there's always kind of a balancing point where if you're too strong, are you carrying too much muscle mass to be, effective in Taekwondo? Because we're not a strength sport in the end. We are very much more of a speed power sport, and there's a skill element to it. So we need to be strong enough to support that fast explosive movements, the repetitive actions through the joints, those plyometric movements, and we need enough joint strength and stability to support that, but not so much that we actually manage to build more muscle mass than we need for our height or for our reach, effective. Things that we'd use, talk about the main prime ones.
Yeah, squat, deadlift, press, bench, pull-ups, compound movements.
Yeah,
compound movements. I think that's the key. Yeah, getting a good strong base and just developing a strong base that you can then build your other training and physical components on, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and then we place great store in the plyos, the expression of whatever strength that you have in terms of the rate of force development. How quickly can you generate what force it is that you can generate? Because again, there is an exception. Like once you get into people that are power breakers, it is different. We don't have to be that fast. Yeah. Having more muscle mass helps. So if you're a specialist, you definitely might want to be adding more muscle mass and looking at that form of training. But for people who are going to be particularly patterns or sparring or even special technique to a particular point, it has to be supportive of your training rather than taking it over. And as to what type, yeah, we generally focus on the compound lifts, the big multi-joint movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Same as when you're running, you don't want to take over your training. Like, if you're being strong and being the strongest person in the gym or isn't going to necessarily make you a good sparrer, good at patterns. So it's just like that, same with your running and your conditioning. And it can be hard sometimes because especially if you're lifting and you start to see, well, look, I'm stronger and the weight that I'm lifting is going up, it's easy to see progression there. So you get too caught up in lifting the weights and it's harder to see progression maybe when you're a top level sparrer. It's harder to see, is my psych getting better, is my blitz getting better? Whereas it's much easier to see, like if I was lifting 50 kilos last week and I'm lifting 55 this week, well then there was definite progression. So
10% improvement.
Yeah, so it's hard to, it can be hard to not get caught up, but it is important to remind yourself that you still are trying to improve performance in your sport.
Absolutely, that's so important. Like what are we doing this extra training for? Exactly, you don't want to get, as Jamie said, too caught up with it. And if you want to hear some other good perspectives from Jamie, make sure and check out his podcast, The Black Belter. Okay, it's good to have you here with us today. So today's Q&A was just a little way to give back to people who've been following us and helping out people who have been following us along the way while we got to the 9K subs. So it's just a little something we do every 1,000 subs usually. So the next one should be a nice milestone of the 10K. So stay tuned for that and we might have a nice surprise lined up. So as always, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, took some good value away from it, and we'll catch you in the next one.
See you next Friday.